Hello viewers, thank you for joining me. I mentioned at the end of my last review that the next show would be something very different, and it is. We're going from a bland high school romance to a life-or-death battles protecting the city from magic monsters type of series. But ironically, where I want to start is with something the two shows had in common. In both cases, the first episode really made an impression on me, with Just Because it was the surprising glimmer of life after a pretty dull opening, and maybe it was just my own optimism for the series that made it memorable, but Ga-Rei Zero has the kind of opening episode that I expect sticks with most people for a while after it ends. Let me paint this picture for you. We begin our story in a Tokyo that's under siege by phantoms, a vaguely defined variety of yokai or spirit beasts. To combat these attacks, the Supernatural Disaster Countermeasures Division is mobilized, basically the government's paranormal defense force. This setup introduces us to Toru, a young man brooding in front of a grave, reflecting on an incident with a creepy white-haired boy and some mysterious butterflies that clearly didn't end so well. One of his teammates comes and gets him for the battle, and so we embark on a night of fighting giant monsters with exorcist-type defenses, holy water followed up by each member of the team's personal weapon of choice. There's also quite a lot of seeing the regular police force fail to be useful, a lot of government board meetings where they argue over funding. Not exactly the most thrilling part of the story, but I could appreciate that the background needed to be set. I did enjoy getting introduced to Toru's team, watching them fight, seeing the mystery develop a bit when the team starts coming across familiar, shimmery blue butterfly wings in the aftermath of their battles. So episode 1 starts coming to an end, with the team regrouping and starting to relax after a long night. I thought it was a pretty decent start, not willing to make any judgments just yet. And then, their peaceful moment is suddenly broken when one of the guy's cups falls to the ground, accompanied by a good chunk of his arm. Before he can even process what happened, there's a sword through his chest, the guy next to him's been sliced to pieces, the teammate in their command center has shot their leader and then herself. About 2 minutes left to the episode, and out of nowhere this human girl just appears and slaughters the entire team, who are apparently not our main protagonists. It sure left an impression. I love when a show manages to genuinely catch me off guard. There was a lot of information thrown at me in episode 1, so I'd been taking notes, just trying to keep track of it all, but a lot of those notes related to the characters, to help remember their names and whatnot, so I just had to look at half of them at the end and be like, well, I guess I don't need these now. It was a satisfying kind of shock, though. So the real story of Ga-Rei Zero isn't really introduced until episode 2, where we meet another Vanquisher team, who I was a little more apprehensive about getting attached to. But most important of this new group of actual main protagonists is their youngest member, a high school girl named Kagura Tsuchimiya. It's another episode of a night spent protecting the city from phantoms, but this team is working with a bit of a handicap. One of their members went missing recently, and you can probably guess where this is going. Our murderess from episode 1 makes a reappearance, and the group is horrified to recognize Yomi Isayama, their missing teammate, who was pretty much their ace vanquisher, if not officially the team's leader. But honestly, even episode 2 hasn't quite gotten us into the true story yet. Because yes, betrayal is a big part of Ga-Rei Zero, but it's just as much a story about family, what it means to be one and what you'd be willing to do for them. So after setting up the present-day story and leaving us on an awful cliffhanger, episode 3 takes us back in time, to where it all began, and shows a very different aspect of this Vanquisher system. The government division is a pretty recent development. Since ancient times, there have been clans of exorcist families dealing with this threat. Kagura comes from one of the most highly regarded ones, The Tsuchimiya family actually has a phantom under their control, passed down from one head of the clan to the next, though wielding it comes with quite the price. She's the daughter of the current clan head, who's been really strict with her training for as long as she can remember. One thing that's clear from the moment you meet him is that he's a vanquisher first and a father second, so when Kagura's mother is killed in battle, she's taken in by the Isayama family, another vanquisher clan. More importantly, they take her in after much encouragement from Yomi, the daughter of their clan head, who was adopted herself after her parents were killed by phantoms. Yomi has spent her life since the adoption working her hardest to prove she was worth it. The Isayama clan head is a really caring guy, though, and never expresses anything but his full faith in her, fully intending to pass leadership on to Yomi over a blood relative. To mixed opinions from the rest of the family, and you can bet that comes up later. But the biggest thing here is that she's incredibly welcoming and supportive of Kagura, telling her she's always wanted a younger sister. Their relationship is the core of this story. To be honest, the Yomi we meet in episode 2 is, not over-the-top evil, but she really sells it, I'll put it that way. So it was almost off-putting to see her act so sweetly with Kagura. It took me a few episodes to wrap my head around it and stop looking for hints that she was scheming something devious from the start. But Yomi, though tough when she needs to be, is a genuinely kind person. She makes a good partner for Kagura, who's also sweet but doesn't have Yomi's confidence. It was actually really moving to see her come out of her shell, because all she's ever known is training. Kagura's character was an interesting contradiction for me. Yomi mentions again and again that Kagura has a sort of natural talent and the potential to surpass Yomi herself, but her heart isn't really in it. One of my favorite parts of this show was watching Kagura learn to be brave without losing the peace-loving optimist at her core. Ga-Rei Zero did a great job of that. There are a lot of series where characters undergo drastic growth, but end up losing who they used to be completely in the process. In fact, another series where a character grew so naturally into that better version of themselves doesn't immediately come to mind. I wouldn't say all the characters are terribly deep and engaging, but Yomi and Kagura are handled really well. More often than not, the components that made up this series were handled well. Ga-Rei Zero is rated for mature audiences. There are a few scenes with full nudity, but I wouldn't say this show was fan-servicey to the point where it should be off-putting for anyone. Mostly where you see evidence of the rating is during the fights. They didn't have to tone down the violence at all, and personally that's how I prefer it. It helps keep the stakes high, and after the twist with the first episode, it didn't really feel like I could rely on plot armor. We know from the beginning that it's going to end with a fight between the sisters, and Kagura is the one on the side of our heroes, but I wouldn't have put it past this show to go for a tragic, less traditional ending. I love being kept on my toes. The relationship between Yomi and Kagura was everything it needed to be. They did feel like sisters who'd always been together by the time we get back to present day, and the conclusion is just as emotional as you'd expect it to be. I felt there were some flaws with the time management. The focus wasn't always where it should have been, but to really talk about that is going to bring us to the section of this review that contains spoilers. So if you haven't seen it yet, and don't want to hear specifics about the story up to the very end, I really enjoyed this one, and definitely recommend it. Without going into those final details, I really have nothing but praise for it. But by the time I finished the final episode, it did leave me feeling that I would have done things a little differently, had I had any say over the writing. So let's get into that. The mystery of the boy with the butterflies is introduced at the very beginning, yet somehow it's the only major aspect of the story that's not fully explored by the end. We get what's really just a passing moment of a discussion with the Countermeasures Division's chief and her assistant, where they bring up a professor who went missing with his family while researching Bane stones, and the boy is easily recognizable in the family photo, but this is never investigated further. He really starts to come into play when we're introduced to Yomi's cousin, Mei. Yomi's uncle has some opinions about leadership of the clan passing to the adopted Yomi rather than his blood-related daughter. Mei herself presents a pretty understanding front whenever the topic comes up in official settings, but she assures her dad in private that it's only because she knows the life of a vanquisher is a dangerous one. She thinks it's only a matter of time before something takes Yomi down, and they could easily manufacture and disguise that something themselves. But Mei runs into the boy with the butterflies first, and he turns out to be the something that takes her down, but he revives her with a Bane stone, which are fragments of the souls of fox spirits. For a time, they'll give their users near limitless power and regeneration abilities, but all the while they're eating away at the soul of whoever they've been implanted in, until ultimately that person becomes a phantom themselves. That's actually something that doesn't get explained until much later down the line. For the whole time that we see Mei using the stone, she's just mysteriously powerful. But her first act of business is to kill Yomi's father, and her own father promptly takes this opportunity to forge a will naming Mei as the rightful heir. Yomi is heartbroken, but actually quite respectful of this, as long as she believes it's what her father truly wanted, even though every conversation she ever had with him would suggest otherwise. But it's not enough for Mei. She moves to take out Yomi anyway, revealing the truth behind her father's death, but loses control of the stone mid-battle. Yomi then confronts the boy for manipulating her cousin, but she also fails to overpower him, and ends up with a Bane stone of her own forcefully implanted into her. And this is when the writing started to get a little tricky, because it felt like they ran out of time to properly explore everything. The Bane stones draw on a person's most powerful raw emotions. For Mei, it was jealousy over her cousin being in line to inherit what she felt was rightfully hers. Yomi's now lost her family again, betrayed by two people who should have been a part of this second chance she got. I really wish they'd ironed out Yomi's motives a little more, because I could totally see her blaming the clan politics and turning on these old traditional ways of doing things. She really did lose everything in such a short time span. Her father, her right to lead. She'd been betrothed to the heir of another clan, and she really was in love with him, despite it being an arranged marriage. The engagement gets broken off as soon as she loses her position. And then, to top it all off, one of the first things Mei decrees is that it's time Kagura starts standing on her own and sends her back to her own clan. But Yomi's hatred is broad enough that she claims she's out to destroy all humanity, not just the system that got her here. And that felt like it wasn't quite right to me. The boy claims they're in control of their actions, and though I can see how their emotions influenced those actions, this Banestone business feels more like a possession to me. Yomi and Mei both have moments of clarity where they're horrified by what they've done. The explanations for it all were thrown in kind of late and didn't feel totally complete. However, Yomi's story is still brought to a satisfying conclusion. It was the boy himself who was the worst casualty of not having enough time for everything. He's the true villain, lurking in the background of it all from the very first episode. But I don't recall the anime ever even revealing a name. He has a Banestone implanted too, but seems much more in control of himself than Mei or Yomi. Once the conflict with Yomi reaches its end, he quite literally just fades into the shadows with some evil monologuing about how he'll be back someday. I don't think Kagura ever even discovered what really happened to make her sister this way. And I mean, I've read up on the manga just enough to know that there are two distinct story arcs to it. The first one is this conflict with Yomi. The boy's time to be the real focus of the story doesn't come until the next phase. But the way Ga-Rei Zero ends didn't leave me with the impression that they expected to get a season 2 that never came to be. It stands alone pretty well as its own complete story, but if they'd utilized these 12 episodes a little differently, I believe they could have fit in a better explanation of who he was and what his motivations were, maybe even some sort of anime-only demise, or, you know, any explanation at all. He was the real villain after all. Anyway, what I've been getting at is that I don't love how the series was structured. I brought you through the first 2 episodes, and then episode 3 starts the flashback episodes, where we stay until it brings us back around to present day at the very end. That started to wear on me around episode 5 or 6. I was impatient to get back to the fight, wishing they'd intersperse these flashbacks with the present-day drama, but now that I've reached the end and seen how short the conflict with Yomi actually turned out to be, they could have found the time to explore the boy with the butterflies and eliminate the cliffhanger that drove me a little crazy, just by rearranging the first 2 episodes. I know I've had nothing but praise for the first episode up to this point. I really did love that twist at the end. Considering they're all dead by the end, though, the group really isn't important enough that we need to spend an entire episode with them. The rest of the episode is spent on building tension between the different government agencies, which never really comes up again, and a lot of time throughout the series is spent on getting into the specifics of the different types of phantoms, which, it might sound weird to say, also isn't actually that important. The phantom attacks are background to this universe. You don't really need to be able to identify which category each kind of phantom is classified as. They get across the information you need to know pretty succinctly, that when Yomi turns traitor, she's marked as a Category A, the highest threat that comes with the order to kill on sight. So they could have fit all the exposition bits that were actually important into the first episode. And to be honest, episode 2 didn't really need to happen at all. The fight with our actual main crew that ends in them identifying Yomi is something we see again once the backstory catches up to present day, and the rest of the episode is spent on the government higher-ups investigating what happened to the team from episode 1. It's a lot of screen time for something the audience should have had no trouble deducing themselves. It's pretty clear there's a traitor from the moment you see the first squad taken down by another human. They could have ended on that twist, and then rewound the story to the beginning starting with episode 2, giving them a whole episode's worth of time to at least give the main villain a name. But that's my one really long critique. Ga-Rei Zero was a great show overall. Even here in this spoiler section, I purposely kept the outcome of the Yomi Kagura fight as vague as I could. It was a wonderfully emotional conclusion, and I wouldn't want to take that away from anyone, even if they decided to hang out for the specifics. So this anime has a very enthusiastic recommendation from me, and there's really not much left to say. Thank you for watching.